We turbocharged my naturally aspirated Falcon in less than 3 days.
How much did it end up costing? How much did it cost?
What was the general?
How much did the entire thing cost?
Okay. I guess that we are doing this. How much did my NA+T build end up costing me? I'm going to go through and list all of the parts that have been used on my build so far, and then add them all up and see what the final cost is at the end. A couple of things before we begin. If you haven't been following this build from the start, my original plan was to just throw a turbo on my NA Falcon as cheaply as possible. I wanted to, one, prove that the NA motors can in fact take boost. Even to this day, when I see people talking about doing NA+T builds online, a bunch of people in the comments falsely believe that NA rods cannot handle more than 5 to 8 pounds of boost, which is obviously just wrong. Myself and loads of other people with NA+Ts have proven that wrong. So as a result, the argument has moved on from, well, the NA motors can't handle it, to, oh, well, it costs too much to do an NA+T build. The suggestion is that instead you sell your NA Falcon for the 5 grand it's probably worth, and instead fork out the 20 to 30 grand for a factory XR6 turbo. I also wanted to prove that this isn't true either, and that if you already own an NA Falcon, it is very financially reasonable to turbo that Falcon and get pretty good power figures at a cost well below what it would cost you to buy a factory XR6 turbo. Since that initial plan, this build has become less of an NA+T and closer to a turbo conversion. The only NA left in my NA+T is the ECU, wiring in the engine bay, exhaust valves, and of course, the NA rods and pistons. And I'm planning on changing the ECU and wiring pretty soon anyway to turbo stuff, which kind of brings me on to my next point. I have taken so long to make this video because every time I think I'm ready to make it, I find something else that I want to improve on the car, and I want to include that cost in the final build figures, and I just keep pushing it back and pushing it back. But I realized that, like the ship of Theseus, I could keep changing parts again and again and again on the car until eventually one day I'm going to look at it and kind of say, is this still the same car I was supposed to be doing a cost video of doing NA+T? So I figured it was time to just nut up, make this video, even though I'm not happy with the car's current build progress, but I feel like I'm 95% of the way there. One of the things that I'm frustrated about is I don't have current power figures. Obviously, when the car was initially built, we got 470 horsepower at 12 pounds. For the last 6 or 7 months, I've been running the car at 18 pounds, and it's been operating great. It's so much faster, so much more powerful, but I don't have dyno figures to see what the, current power figures are. I did take it to get a power run on a dyno, but we quickly found that at very high boost, it starts to lean out. The AFRs get pretty dodgy. There's just not enough fuel getting in. The most likely problem is that the wiring harness for the fuel pump is just not delivering enough power. This is a super common problem in Falcons when you start trying to deliver more and more fuel, and especially when you start putting larger fuel pumps in. I've got a new wiring setup on the way. It's just not here and not in the car yet, so it's not ready to go back on the dyno and try and get that power figure. So for now, it's somewhere above 470 horsepower, but who knows where it could actually be. I'll make update videos in the future as I continue to upgrade these things on the car, and hopefully I'll arrive at a much better power figure in the coming months. But for now, the best that I can say is 470 horsepower at 12 pounds. The car is capable of handling 18, it has been for months, but we don't know what that power is. So keep that in mind as we start to look at the final cost of this build. Let's start with the most obvious thing, the turbo. As I mentioned in the video, I had intended to use a Pulsar turbo, and as you all know, Pulsar turbos tend to run for under $1,000, but due to the limitations I had with the external gate that I had bought at the time, I ended up running a Kinagawa turbo, which I had bought during COVID. That turbo cost $2,615. The external gate kit was a TurboSmart external gate and a rear housing that was from XR6 Turbo Developments, and that cost $1,500. Intercooler and piping, Pulsar, $1,000. The intake manifold, also Pulsar, $800. The turbo fuel rail was an OEM rail that I got for $100 off of Marketplace. Fuel pressure regulator was a drop-in regulator by Go Fast Bits, and that cost $293. Don't forget to subscribe while you're here. Follow me on TikTok and Instagram as well. I know some people hate it when YouTubers ask you to subscribe, but the sad truth is every time I do it, I get hundreds more subscribers than I normally would. Exhaust manifold was an OEM one that I got for, I think, $50. Battery relocation and turbostat intake by Ants for $480. 460 litre fuel pump was $200. 1000cc injectors, I'm pretty sure they were Bosch, they were $550. Crow cams valve springs for $390. Oil pump gears and backing plate by Boundary, that was $700. The timing chain kit that I had was an Atomic for $700, but I swapped out the adjuster due to all the problems that Atomic had with their timing chain adjusters with a Empire Elite performance adjuster, and that set me back $200. ARP head studs, $550. Oil feed line, water feed line, and the bracket to hold those lines were all Maculec, and they set me back $240, $150, and $195 respectively. The blow-off valve was Go Fast Bits for $386. Dump pipe and cat by Ants for $800, and then the catback exhaust was X-Force, and that was $810. The little aftermarket power steering cooler we used to replace the factory one was just a generic Aeroflow cooler, and that cost $80. Map sensor was an OEM one, and that cost $60. The Go Fast Bits boost controller was $410. I installed a wideband O2 by AEM, and that connects directly to the Go Fast Bits controller and displays on that screen, and that cost $300. Factory turbo gearbox, $1,200. Factory turbo tail shaft and rear cradle were $300 each. Then the Eaton True Track M86 diff center for that diff was $1,200. And then finally, the brake bracket, which allowed me to fit turbo rotors and upgrade my front brakes to turbo brakes, was $170. Which brings us to a final build cost of $16,679, which is a fantastic ending cost considering I have almost totally turbo converted this car and still spent less money than what I would spend on average to buy a factory XR6 turbo. In fact, with the amount of power that I'm making, both confirmed by a dyno and in theory by having 18 pounds of boost instead of the 12 that was the dyno run, I believe that you would have to be spending closer to that 30 grand mark to get a factory XR6 turbo, which is making similar power, because people who are selling these cars are wanting to recoup some of the cost that they have spent building a car that makes that much power. Now, of course, I'm not remotely suggesting that the NA bottom end is going to go as far as a turbo bottom end. Frankly, I've seen factory turbo bottom ends go well over 800 horsepower. And in fact, depending on the condition of the motor, I could potentially pull it out of the car, strip it down, and then have a bottom end built and still have spent less money than it would have cost me to buy a factory XR6 turbo. I would have completely converted the car to full XR6 turbo with a built bottom end and still have spent less money than on average what it would cost me to buy a factory XR6 turbo. Yes, there's going to be a bunch of people in the comments, well, I bought my XR6 turbo in 2016 for $15,000 and all that sort of nonsense, but I have been watching for years on Facebook Marketplace and car sales the average prices of XR6 turbos, and other than a few notable exceptions that are below the $20,000 mark, every XR6 turbo nowadays starts at a minimum of $20,000 and quickly goes up from there. I believe an NA+T, even one that is as far as I have taken mine, is a much better financial decision for anybody who already owns an NA Falcon. And with that, thank you for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe. Go check out my other videos if you want to see more about the NA+T build, or if you just want to see more about Falcons in general. And I will see you guys in the next video.